All right. Woo. Everybody enjoy their lunch. We got it still cold enough in here for you to stay awake, right? Yeah? All right. Well, I'll tell you all personally that I'm excited to be a part of this and the fact that the coalition, the collaborative exists, because the stories that we're trying, the things that we're trying to change here in the community, we can't make that change without media support. And so the stories that you all have been hearing and the stories that you are telling, it is really critical that our media partners are here. And so both like WFAE and WCNC and the Observer coming out too, it's just really critical that we have used the media to tell the stories that we want to tell and change the narrative, the predominant narrative that they so often sort of default to because it's the easier story to say. They may not ever have me back, but I just want to let you know. And I'm a full-blown reporter, so I can definitely say that. So with that, I'm going to go down the line and then we'll get into it. So, Mark?
We have to do microphones. My voice carries.
Yeah, I think they're probably recording. They're recording. Yeah, it's online.
Okay, is this for? Yeah, there it is. Again, I'm Mark Ethridge. I'm a principal of Ascent Housing. We preserve nationally current affordable housing here in Charlotte. We bought and renovated and deed-restricted 1,250 units in the last couple of years, and just raised our second fund, so hope to do another 1,000 units or more here over the next couple of years.
Give it up for Mark. That's awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Titiksha Fernandes, and I am the program manager for Away Home, which is a public-private endowment that's hosted by the Foundation for the Carolinas. And I'll walk you through more about the program because I realized today that a lot of people don't know about the program. So I'm here to tell you more in a little bit.
What she's not telling you is it helps renters, and that's often a part that's left out of the conversation. So.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stephanie Williams with Alliance Health. I am the Supportive Housing Director, and I'm sure people are wondering what would a health organization want to do with housing. Well, Alliance sees housing as health care. And yes, we see it as health care, and we are a quasi-governmental agency that manages mental health, substance use, and developmental disabilities for individuals that live in 6 counties, which includes Mecklenburg now. And we hope to set our housing footprint here in Mecklenburg like we have done in Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill.
So one of the reasons I was really excited to host this particular panel is because too often when we're talking about housing, we talk about this like it's a silo and housing exists by itself, and we don't talk about the wraparound support that people need to be successful when they do get housing and how they can stay in their housing. So that's one of the reasons I was really excited that Chris put this panel together as part of this conversation so that we as a broader community can stop talking about these issues as if they are one-off issues that stand alone and think about ways that we can really integrate the work that's happening, whether it's in mental health, whether it's in housing. How do we really work together as a community to address some of these issues? So I want to turn it back over and ask Titiksha to explain a little bit about what Away Home is.
Absolutely. So as Tonya told you a little bit before, Away Home is a $26 million public-private endowment. And through our program, we serve families in need, and we provide them with rental subsidy assistance here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. When I say public-private endowment, and in my personal opinion, it's a beautiful model that we have. We have the city that put in money in the endowment. We have the Foundation for the Carolinas. We have other local community foundations who put in money in the endowment. We have our corporate leaders here in Charlotte, which is Bank of America, Wells Fargo. And then we have our lovely county that is sitting over here as well. They fund our social workers. So what we do is when families come, they need housing. Our partner agencies, which are Charlotte Family Housing, Salvation Army, and our newest agency, Heal Charlotte, they help these families find rental units across the whole region. If families can afford only, let's say, $300 towards rent, and they can't afford the other $1,000, $1,200, that's where our endowment kicks in. So we try to close the gap gap between what our families can afford and what the market rental rate in our area, in our area is. So that's where we come in. But since we're here also to talk about wraparound supportive services, one of the other really nice things that we do in our program is through monthly meetings, we bring in different partners from across the region. So we've had Alliance Health, and we partner with them because we do strongly believe that while providing rental assistance is essential for our families, we do acknowledge that all these other wraparound services are also very important to help these families gain self-sufficiency at the end of our 2-year program. So, we bring in healthcare, bring in employment resources, childcare resources, transportation, you name it. If there's anyone here who has any resources that they would like to share with families in need, please contact me. We'll be happy to have you on board.
All right. So when we talk about the wraparound services, one of the things I was really excited to read about, Mark, you all are doing the Peppertree apartments, right? So you all are familiar with Peppertree's right down Central Avenue. They were able to purchase it and keep it as an affordable housing, but they announced yesterday this really cool partnership that they're doing with Atrium, and I want Mark to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So Peppertree is a 292 unit multifamily property on Central, just outside of Plaza-Maplewood. That was built in the mid-'80s. We bought it in November of last year and renovated it for the long-term deed restriction, like we do on all of our NOAs. Atrium has been an incredible partner for us. Not only they're an investor in both of our funds, but they've been the shepherd of all of our on-site supportive services. They actually embed a community health worker at each one of our properties that coordinates both on-site programming as well as outbound referrals to various partners in the areas that you're going to hear a lot about during this hour. And one kind of innovation from that, when we surveyed our residents at our first 3 or 4 properties, one of the things we kept hearing about from them was access to healthcare being a big issue. And so they had this program out in the rural counties and schools and libraries and churches where they opened something called a community-based virtual clinic, which is like a primary physician care office that you can telehealth with a primary care doctor with if you have a nurse physically present on site. So we said, why can't we do that in a place-based model at a residential property? And so we chopped off half of our clubhouse and we built it out into a community-based virtual clinic that Atrium is now going to operate 5 days a week that's accessible not only to our residents at Peppertree, but to anyone. And so if you're on the Central Avenue corridor, you can walk to the Peppertree clubhouse, set up an appointment, get seen by a primary care physician within a short period of time. So we're really excited about that. I don't think we've found a precedent, at least locally, of someone embedding that in a residential property, and it's open now to the public, so it was a good excuse for road coding.
How realistic is it to get other developers to do something like that? Like, so we talk about this does affordable housing and some of these other developers. As you are creating this new model, is there any potential to replicate that with other developers here too?
I think it's really precipitated by the healthcare system really acknowledging housing and the social determinants of health being something that they want to outwardly and proactively address. Atrium's been very generous in everything they've done for us, including the operation of this clinic. And from a real estate perspective, it does not cost a lot of money for us to dedicate the space, build it out, and have that. And so really, I mean, it's like been a godsend for us to be able to avail this to our residents, especially because every time when we buy a property, the first thing we do is we ask our residents, what are the barriers in your lives? We don't try to prescribe things to help drive upward mobility. And so when we're hearing that time and time again, and we're looking for solutions for them to offer that, and have it really fit into work that they're already out doing in the community, I think is really, really great. So I think because we have great healthcare systems here locally that have really come to acknowledge that need, I think there's an attractive marriage now between housing providers and healthcare systems in doing this. And one thing I'll mention a couple times is just when you provide services on site, it eliminates so many of the barriers that low and moderate income families face in accessing services. But you don't have to worry as much about transportation and childcare and navigating your hours of work. I think that's one of the things that we hope is really efficacious as the years go by.
That's great. Stephanie, I wanted to ask you, especially as we talk about the social determinants of health, we have several people here who are with the Home for All, which is an initiative to end homelessness. And one of the things we hear often over and over again is mental health. You heard on the panel earlier too, mental health. Can you talk a little bit about these like emergency mental health clinics that you all have set up out in the Wake County, Durham County area, and what that looks like, and is that coming to Charlotte too?
So, great point to bring up, and I did want to piggyback off of something that Mark said about healthcare and the partnership with developers. It is a win-win for both. It is a win for the community, it's a win for the developer, and it's a real big win for the person. They're getting access to decent, safe, and affordable housing, and then they're getting the support that they need to maintain that housing. What we often see with people, because they don't have the supports that they need, even though they have access to the rental assistance, as you mentioned, they don't have the supports to manage their housing. And so when those services are in place, they can manage those things effectively. And so I think you will see more of that. That's the investments that Alliance has made in its other areas, and want to do that same thing here in Charlotte. So answering your question about the mental health clinics, in the Triangle area, Alliance has developed these clinics, emergency clinics, for people to access services. These are free to the person. They can come in, access the services that they need, the mental health services that they need at that time, so that they can stabilize. There's medication that may be available for that individual. They're getting the therapy and any other treatment that they need. If they need detox, those things are happening in these clinics. And it was a way for us to decrease the cycle of people going in and out of hospitals or using the emergency departments, as well as going in and out of jails. The jail is not a place for people with mental health diagnosis, and this was a way to eliminate some of those unnecessary jail stays for people, because oftentimes people with mental health diagnosis actually remain in the jails or the prison system much longer than they need to, because they don't have access to an attorney, or they're not educated on what they need to do in the criminal justice system. So this is why those clinics are set, and hopefully we will get a clinic set here in the Mecklenburg region as well. I know we've been working with different partners. We work with the county, I just realized. So we work with some different partners trying to get that established. The Alliance has only been in Mecklenburg County a little over a year, so we're still trying to feel our way around in this area and trying to replicate some of the things that have been effective in, especially the next largest city in our state, which is Raleigh. So we're trying to replicate some of those things.
One of the things I keep hearing from all three of you all is partners. Each of you has referenced a partner here in the community. Can you talk a little bit, any one of you all can talk, Titiksha, I'll have you start though, but talk about how the partnerships have helped you all do the work, and how did you all come to form the partnerships that you've created?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to dive in a little deeper into the program itself, so every month we have what is called a technical committee meeting, and in this meeting we have all our partner agencies that are actually implementing the program come in. We have the county, we have city, we also have we have the Housing Collaborative, Dream Key partners. But during these meetings is when we invite external partners to come in and share some of their resources. So like I mentioned earlier, we had Alliance Health come in, we've had Atrium Health come in, Novant, we've had Bank of America come in when they were doing their enterprise employment program as well. And to be honest, like the endowment, it provides the rental subsidy, but it's really all these partners that provide us all these additional wraparound services that are so incredibly important for our families. Without these partnerships, I don't know that the families would reach self-sustenance at the end of those 24 months. In terms of how these partnerships started, I leveraged the Foundation for the Carolinas, and they're a powerhouse in this community, and I use their name, and that's how I get everyone to come on board.
Was it a matter of asking or surveying clients, like one of the things Mark said is that they surveyed wherever they go in? Did you all do the same thing to see what you needed, what partnerships you needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So we constantly have a conversation with all our partners. Now, me as a program manager, I don't have direct contact with the clients, but once in a while, I'll do my site visits. But we constantly take feedback from our partners, trying to understand where some of the gaps are, where there are opportunities and challenges, and then accordingly we'll start to focus on a certain partnership. So just to give you an example, last year one of the big things that came up, one of the big feedbacks that we received was social worker retention rates. Just talking outside of like the family challenges, one of the challenges we were facing was our social workers were not staying, and they're so essential to our families. Their mental health, job satisfaction. So we sought out partnerships specifically with Alliance Health as well, just to find some community resources for mental health specifically for our social workers. So yeah, as and when challenges arise, we try and do our best to find specific resources for those. Absolutely.
What type of gaps have any of you all seen in the partnerships that we do have? What do we need?
We need better coordination. We've got a lot of agencies, we've got a lot of groups, we've got a lot of beautiful minds here in Charlotte, and I think sometimes it's hard for us to all get connected and find it. And I finally grew our company this year and added someone. And when you're a real estate investor, the first person you hire is usually an analyst. They're just like crunch the numbers and do all the kind of grunt work of underwriting a real estate investment, overseeing a renovation. And I didn't hire that person. I hired someone from the United Way, who's really running operations for us, because the support services we have and also all the housing programs that we run in our properties requires so many relationships and so much coordination that was the perfect fit for what we really needed to make our affordable housing portfolio robust. And so I think having someone who's dedicated to really cultivating that is starting to address a weakness we have, where you're really trying to navigate what you're hearing from your residents, leverage the strengths that you have maybe for us, like within our investor base, with our relationships with both the county and the city, but then trying to bring all those pieces together and figure out what fits where is really a full-time job. And so I think having that navigation is really critical. I think is just a myopic view of what we could look at from a macro level as well.
I would agree with Mark. Coordination is needed, but we do need more organizations like Mark's organization. County and city dollars or federal dollars can't solve all the housing problems. We need private investors, and we also need the healthcare industries to step up as well with investment, because if healthcare systems really looked at the cost that the money they would save if people were in housing, in safe, affordable housing, it would really decrease the number of visits that happen in the clinics, in detox centers, as well as your emergency departments. But I think those are the two industries that we don't always see at the table when we're looking at social services agencies. We invite our mental health system, our Department of Social Services, juvenile justice, or other public agencies and nonprofit agencies, but we don't always invite those private investors and even the news outlets. We don't always invite those people to the table.
Both of you have said coordination. Give me an example, or give us an example, but when you say that there needs to be better coordination, what is an example of the lack of coordination?
We're going with a really interesting, I think there's an interesting conversation that's happening over at the city right now about how do we tie affordable housing investments to services, right? And then, we're spending money here and we're spending money here, and how we bring those things together to really see if we can leverage both to create better economic mobility in our community. And so, for the first time after 3 or 4 years of kind of doing this work, we're really figuring out what are the programs that you all have supported or know about or funded we have this embedded resource with this community health worker that can navigate it. We have two things our residents have said, we have two things that the city supports, and now for the first time we're coming together and say, you have this service that our residents need, and they're here, and they don't have to drive or get childcare or navigate logistics to access the service that we bring on site. And so to me, that was kind of an aha moment, like, wow. Like, if you're a service provider and you have a great program, but you're having a hard time getting engagement from folks, like, we have the people who need these services on site. We have a space for the services to happen. We have someone who has rapport and trust with our residents to deliver and convey the message about those services, like the ingredients are there. And so I think just kind of finding that nexus of all those connections has been really cool. And then another thing that I'll kind of mention about the mental health, high priority, right? Huge top of the list, can't say it enough. Having, skilled social workers, I, after 4 years of this, and my wife being a social worker, for the first time talked to UNC Charlotte School of Social Work, and we're like, what are the 300 students you have in your graduate program do for work placements? And where are they? And they're all in clinical settings or they're non-clinical settings, and could they access people who are in affordable housing, and could they this and that? And it's like, it took us 4 years to get there, and we had this conversation, and to me it was like the most exciting hour-long conversation I've had in a very long time. And so I think it's sitting down and really thinking about it and trying to layer in these resources and building a couple of the pieces and then trying to figure out a way to complete the rest of the puzzle. I think that's what's cool. And I think it kind of feels like, for us, and sometimes I see it maybe across the community conversations, it feels like we're taking that next step of layering sometimes. I think 5 years ago, we spent how do we go from doing this much affordable housing, how do we grow those numbers? Now we're saying, okay, we've got more private sector participation, more developers, more public sector participation. We've got more folks on the ground doing different things, some innovative tools, but what are the layers we can start adding on? So I think this is kind of an exciting time for us in Charlotte to be thinking about ways to build kind of a more robust network.
So I would add the coordination of funding and the access to housing is more of what the lines I was leaning towards. I think all of us, of course, in this room are fighting for the same money. We're fighting for the same housing. And when you have that, it's, I'm going to beat Titiksha to Mark's development, and she's going to beat me there. Instead of us coordinating together, we usually are serving the same people. And having some kind of way that we can coordinate all of our agencies so that we are helping the individual access to housing as quickly as possible versus, I have my list over here, the county has their list, and we're not coordinating the access to housing. We're stepping over each other trying to get that same resource. And how do we coordinate better to either partner on funding opportunities and partner when we're accessing housing, that there's some standardized way that we actually access the affordable housing. So that's where I see the need for more coordination.
I just want to add, it's not so much of a gap, but I did want to also highlight opportunities and spaces and platforms like these where we are right now are also great in terms of forming partnerships and knowing what others are doing. Like I said, I realize most people don't know what a wing home is. A wing home is, once again, a public-private partnership. It has so much potential for replicability in our community. Not to hold Mark hostage to his words, but I always spoke to her earlier about, sending our families over to his units. So I do want to thank Chris and his, don't fight me. I do want to thank Chris and his team, for giving us these opportunities for multiple stakeholders to come together and talk about some of these challenges and come up with solutions together. So.
Well, talking about challenges, I'm sure that you all hear it with your clients, but childcare, the Observer did a great piece today looking at the childcare crisis we have here. And Mark, when I think about what you all are able to do with Atrium and converting part of your clubhouse into a virtual care facility, is there potential to do something like that around childcare, where you would have on-site childcare at maybe a apartment complex, et cetera? Or is there a public partnership opportunity around helping parents afford childcare, Titiksha, for what you all are doing?
So because we don't work directly with landlords or real estate developers, I can speak a little too about what our agencies do. So where they have their shelters placed, or their transitional housing placed, some of them within the same campuses have been trying to, just gather funding to have these childcare resources right on campus. So there has been some effort around there. Of course, you need more and more funding in that area, as we've all talked about. But that's what our agencies are doing. That's what they want to do. Childcare, the lack of childcare resources is real. Our, head of households do want to go out there and earn their income and not have to worry about where do we leave our child, and having access to quality childcare.
We're hopefully figuring one out on one of our properties, but the other thing about what we do is I have to take what I can get. Like I bought a property that was built 30 or 40 years ago, so one property, there was randomly a house surrounded by apartment buildings, and it was vacant. We bought it, and we're like, we're turning the house into a place for community programming, and that was really nice. And Ethridge was great because that's a big clubhouse with a fitness room that one person used a year, and we're like, that'd be better served as a health clinic. But other properties, there's only so much you can do with the physical infrastructure, and so I think we have to be creative on the solutions. But we see it as a huge need. I mean, we have a lot of single moms in our resident base. We have a lot of families with both parents going out in the workforce. And I totally can relate, because I have a 2 and a 3-year-old, another one on the way. So I know the importance of childcare to get, let the adults and the parents get out there and be the breadwinners for the families. And so it's a huge need, and something that I think is, literally, if you don't have it, I don't know how we can expect anyone to do anything to be more financially secure or keep stable housing or what have you. And so we're excited to see what we can do here, but I think the logistics of it and the complexity is going to be a challenge for every developer and every kind of service provider to solve in each situation.
So I just wanted to add something. So it is complex to build those type of developments, but I do know that you have to look for those diamonds in the rough. In the Durham area, there was a property that was sitting vacant, and it was an old school, old elementary school, and actually that development went into rehab through low-income housing tax credit, low-income housing tax credit dollars, as well as some city funds, and then Alliance invested some funds in that. And what you have is an intergenerational development, where there's seniors there. There's actually, they salvaged some of the school, so there's actually childcare within that facility, and then some housing for families. So it's a mixed neighborhood, a mixed community, but it was old school. So I think, finding those kind of places, and like Mark said, I think it's hard, it's complex, it's hard to find those locations, but it is possible. And that area, it was really needed for the community to have that, for those families to have childcare, but to have those opportunities right there where, it really on their door, it says it takes a village. And so it is a village that's raising the children there, because there's a playground, all of that right there at that community.
Essentially, the point you make, because we talk a lot about telling our seniors about selling and their grandkids, et cetera, about selling, but we don't really talk about trying to get some of our commercial real estate people to think about innovative, community useful ways that their properties can be used, instead of just sitting on vacant properties, but actually doing some community good with it. So it's something we can all do a better job of thinking about and talking about. Yeah.
You talk about faith community.
Yes. That is actually on my list of summer. That is on my list of summer tours, is to talk to our faith community, because I think there definitely is a way for that. So, is there anything you all want to ask each other about your programs and what you all are doing?
I already made my ask before. Okay.
I'll make my ass.
I want to know more, why are you here? What have you been doing? What are you going to be doing?
So Alliance is the public quasi-governmental managed care organization, and actually took over operating in Mecklenburg County after Cardinal Innovations left about a year and a half ago. They actually closed their doors, and there needed to be a public mental health system here in Mecklenburg, and Alliance was chosen as that entity to serve Mecklenburg County. Alliance, as I said, covers our Triangle area, also covers Cumberland and Johnston counties. And Mecklenburg, being a larger urban area, fit right into the scope of what Alliance was already doing. And as one of the innovative managed care organizations, we've made a lot of investments into housing because we do see housing as a healthcare issue. We see it as a social determinant of health, and especially for the members that we serve. And so in those areas, we've made investments in several properties like the one I just mentioned. We actually are investing in a tiny home project that's over in Orange County. We're also working in our Wake County area to develop what we call bridge housing, which is housing that helps people between the time that they leave a facility into their permanent housing, because maybe they're waiting for a development to complete and they need somewhere to stay during that time. We actually are developing more of those type settings that provide programming for people to be in those locations, and we're actually bringing those same type of programs to Charlotte. We already are operating one bridge housing program here in Charlotte, and starting in June, we will have another bridge housing program to help individuals as they transition from a hospital stay at Atrium or Novant into their permanent housing. So, and the homeless population as well. So that will be something that we'll have here in June.
Before I turn it over to the audience, one final question for me is, what does long-term planning look like? Like, have you all seen, like, do you have a long-term strategy with your particular organization? Or have you seen a model in some other state that you're like, I would love for Charlotte to be able to do that and replicate that here?
I feel like I keep saying this. Our private endowment, an endowment, it's indefinite. I was lucky enough to just walk into this program, and the endowment was already set. We're going to be serving families for an indefinite amount of time. We moved about 340 families into housing since 2017. We had a 90% success rate, which means our families have remained stably housed, not been evicted, not been evicted during their time in the program. They have maintained or bettered their income as they've been part of our program. That's long-term planning, endowment, public-private endowments, get all the stakeholders involved. Speaking about replicability, just seeing the success of the Away Home program, Mecklenburg County also started their own version of Away Home called Mac Home. That program is now 5 years in, and Mac Home 2.0 is about to start next fiscal year. And the foundation has been very fortunate to have incubated this program, and now we're handing it over to the county. So there's your replicability as well.
Before you let your mic go, so when you talk about your success rates, do you then, the families that access your services and then once they time out, so 2 years you said, right? Once they time out, do you have families that try to reapply, or they go on to be successful? Do you have any tracking or way of knowing what happens after that 2 years?
Yeah, so that's really what our marker of success is, not only based on the 2 years that they're in the program and receiving the subsidy, but we also track them for another 2 years after they've exited the program. So in those 2 years as well, we're tracking if they're still housed, whether it's in the same unit or a different unit. if they're still maintaining employment and they've not had any evictions at all, and that they've also been in contact with us, because that's another challenge that our agencies often face, is that they're not able to get families to keep in touch and just, let us know how they're doing. So those, so essentially we're tracking families for 4 years. While we're giving them subsidy for 2, we're tracking them for 4. So when I say we've had a 90% success rate, that's based on the 4 years and not just 2.
Okay, great, got it.
As I've said, I think for Alliance, we want to replicate what we've done in the Triangle area, and that's investing in affordable housing. I had to pull out my notes so I could see exactly how much we had invested. But in some of our communities, for example, when we went into a partnership for a location in Durham, we actually invested $200,000 in that property. It's a small property, but what we asked for was a 15-year deed restriction to make sure that the units that we purchased stayed affordable for that length of time. So that's the kind of things that we want to be able to do here. We've also had $1.8 million in another property in Wake County. So we're just trying to ask those things with the developer, just to make sure that when we invest in a property with any kind of funding, that there is this commitment to keep those units affordable for a period of time.
And what does success look like for your organization in this work?
So over the past few years, and I have to say, I've only been in my current role for 6 months, but have had to cram all of this information in my head. But have been in housing for, we won't say, I was 2 when I started. I think what we have is our success rate right now is we have about 70% of the people that have gone into our housing programs remain in our housing programs. Thankfully, we have funds set aside to do long-term rental assistance for individuals, so that has really helped so that people are not off of that. They don't, the assistance doesn't end. Even if the person loses their job or their income increases, we just change the amount of the subsidy according to what their income is. So that's been a great help to us. So about 70%. We do have a program with Duke Health System for people that have had surgeries and were actually homeless at the time of their surgery. With that program, we actually have an 85% stability rate, where they have not had any 85% of the individuals that come into that program have remained. So we see the benefits when we have that long-term support and long-term rental assistance for individuals.
Quickly add, in terms of going back to your question about long-term planning, Kenny Robinson has left the building, he would have liked this. But one of the things that we did to enhance our long-term planning was that this was very recent, this was last year, the board came to a realization that we need to bring more and more partners on board. So our legacy away home agencies have been Charlotte Family Housing and Salvation Army. But, we all came to a realization that we need to bring the grassroots agency to the table. So we did, we asked we identified grassroots agencies, we had them come and, do their proposals, and now I'm happy to say that we have Heal Charlotte on board as our new away home agency. We understand grassroots agencies come with certain resources, certain capacities, and again, we want to leverage that foundation, those foundation resources and power, and help build the capacity of these grassroots agencies. And that's also part of our long-term planning, is bringing more and more stakeholders on board and tapping into other more vulnerable families that generally get left out.
I was just kind of reiterate what they've said, and also, you know, I mean, I think we've got housing production up in the affordable world like 3 or 4x in the last few years, which is great. It's not nearly enough, but it's good. It's obviously working. Thinking about, you know, going from a $15 million housing trust fund bond to 50. Have we shown that we can spend it? Yes. Is it enough? No. So can we keep ratcheting that up? I think that's kind of one thing. I look at some other cities across the southeast in the U.S. and say, wow, it'd be nice to have a bond like that. We could definitely find uses for the money. And then I think also, like, I mean, Durham has a huge housing trust fund that they passed. In Texas, I mean, Austin just did get going. Nashville, I think, has a pretty, I mean, sometimes like the $100 to $300 million range. Now, they're not necessarily going to go back every 2 years and get that same amount, but I mean, they're getting big dollars. But I mean, we could spend $100 million every 2 years, and we could channel a lot of the 9 and 4% tax credit deals. We could do those. We could have innovative uses, and I think one thing that is really neat to see is us starting to think about affordable housing in terms of hearing from the neighborhoods and going corridor to corridor and working with those groups and trying to really think about a comprehensive plan. And the incremental dollars might be smaller and they might be scattered across multiple projects, but taking that, you know, I think it's a pilot, right? It's an experiment, but I think it'd be really interesting to see for the people who know those neighborhoods best, what comes out of that, what gets invested. Are there 5 or 6 projects that kind of create this tapestry, and was that successful? And that could be something that could also grow. And so I think, you know, if we think about our housing response in Charlotte as something where we try an idea and then when it's working, we continue to support it and lift it and make it bigger, and we keep doing that on the big and small level, we're going to have success finally getting some traction on shrinking this deficit over the next couple decades. If we don't, we just go from one thing and then we move on to the next. We move on to the next with the same finite amount of money. We're never going to get ahead. Or we're going to become every other city that's only haves and have-nots. And so I think that's what I hope our trajectory is. And there's enough hope for me to think that we can get there, but it's going to take a lot of focus and a lot of attention for us to sustain that.
I really love hearing both of you talk about the importance of being in the community and talking to grassroots folks who are on the ground doing this work. Their voices have been left out for so long, so the fact that you're thinking about it and doing it is just really encouraging to hear. What questions do we have from the audience?
I just want to make a suggestion. I like to brainstorm a lot, and when I see what I see here today, the brain went crazy, says, okay, why don't you all have a conference or workshop, bringing in these committees and these organizations, and just for them, you have your board that says, this is what we do, this is what we need, and how can we help you? It's just, it sounds simple, and it can be, and everybody that comes in with their cards can place their card in that position. This is what we need, this is how we can help you. And it's not a long drawn out, yes, you can talk, but at the same time, you got a board behind you. They place their information there. When you go back, you have all the contact information you need to reach out to these organizations that do what you do or can help you do what you do, or that you can help them do what they're doing. So this information is assembled very quickly and disseminated very quickly. As opposed to, we have these meetings and have the people you all need to meet. Some are here, some are not. You know this one, I got my group over here, I got my group over here. Silos is not going to work to address this issue. Silos that's got to be eliminated. The way you eliminate silos is everybody else knows it. Here's my information, here's my contacts, here's who I work with. Because at some point or another, they're going to find that person, that contact, that resource. Why are we sitting there playing with it? Let's just put it up and let's get it done. As it relates to you all working together, I talked to a young lady that lives in a hotel with several children. She's paying $1,300 a month. She will never get out of that cycle until your organizations come together and says, okay, now here's what we'll do. We can assist you over here for a period of time. So we have the housing over here for you for a period of time. But you will have to come to us and work with this financial organization to straighten out your credit. So from your credit, you got your square away to go ahead and buy. You got places like Bank of America has this new program now where if it's 51% of the money area, guess what? We're going to give you the money. We're going to give you the down payment. You're not going to have any closing costs. So these programs out here, nobody's gelling together, and you take that person out of that hotel, you just took away crime as well. hotels, they're having issues in there, because one young man told me, he said, listen, my mother goes to work and pays $1,300 a month. We don't have food. When I leave that hotel and my siblings are hungry, I'm gonna give them some food. And I'll tell you face to face, I don't care if it's you I gotta get from. I'm gonna get some money, I'm gonna get some food to take care of my siblings. And he looked me in the face, he said, this is not what I want to do, but I don't have an option. So we're gonna have to face the issues that we can't just do our parts of the show, we gotta do all the show.
Thank you. Faith?
I'd be curious to know, can we pass the mic in case it's being recorded for people at home so they can hear? Appreciate it.
I'd be curious to hear from each of you, including the moderator, based on what you know, based on thinking about scaling, what's happening in the country, and your area of expertise. What keeps you up at night?
For me right now, it's definitely getting more money in childcare, because if we don't get that component fixed, people can't be successful. Even if we get them in housing, they're still going to struggle with being able to maintain work and work productivity with the lack of childcare. So that's my current stressor at the moment.
I think it's we've lost such a, security blanket's not a good term for it, but if you look at 10 years ago, all these properties that I like to buy, all these 1990s, 1980s, 1970s apartment communities, their average rent was like $700 or $800 a month. That means if you made $1,000 a month, it took most of what you had, but you could still be there. And if you made a little bit more than that, 14, 15, 16, $7,000 an hour, it was okay. And if you had a voucher program, or this program, or this, or that landlord was there and you're working with them because they liked the fact that a voucher was paying the majority of the rent, and it was guaranteed by the government or some agency or something, it's gone. The average rent of these properties that I look at our comparable properties that look like mine, their one bedrooms rent for $1,400 or $1,500, the two bedrooms rent for $16 or $17. It's more than 100% of what someone at 30% AMI below can afford. It's 80 or 90% of what someone at 50% AMI can afford. It's 60 or 70% of what someone at 60. I mean, it takes everything they have, or it's not enough. They're not going to qualify for it. Their credit score is too low. They have eviction on the record, out of the question. And they're also starting to say no to the people who have any form of housing assistance, whether it be a rental subsidy or a voucher. And so it's terrifying, because we just don't have any options that, even if it wasn't perfect, even if people were paying 50 or 60% of their income towards rent, they could make it work to at least be sheltered. And then it is gone. And so the worst apartment in Charlotte, the worst neighborhood, is a little bit cheaper than the motels are. Motels are actually cheaper. It's still $1,000 or $1,100 a month. And most people, because of credit, because of eviction, because of some other issue, they're in the motel, paying no $200 a month, and literally 100% of their income is going towards it. And to me, it turns into this can you imagine being a child in that situation? And you get yanked out of school, and just how do you even get to school? How do you get fed? How do you do all these things? And it's really destabilizing for these communities, and it's gone from a problem that, I think that problem is growing tremendously. And so I think that's what worries me, because we're never going to get more money from the federal government for more housing choice vouchers. It has been a very long time since we've gotten appropriated. So we have to get really creative. It is very difficult to give out $300 and $400 rents. That's what 30% AMI below household means. We've got 23,000 people in this county that need it, 23,000 households. We've got to get really creative to work on that, because that was okay when we had this buffer that could kind of pick up some of that stuff, and that buffer is gone, and so people are really exposed to kind of the worst perils now.
So keeping me up. I'd love to hear from that.
Yeah.
Mine's pretty short. It's similar to what you were saying earlier on. It's breaking down the silos for me. Over and over again, I've worked in fields outside of affordable housing and homelessness, and I've seen the same challenges there, silos. It bothers me a lot. Keeps me up at night. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, but somehow we do it over and over and over again. I'm here. I agree with you. I think we need like a database or an ecosystem map of sorts where one can go and just see who's doing what and reach out.
I think what keeps me up at night is knowing that people don't know where to turn for help. Oftentimes, especially people with mental health and substance use disorders, not knowing where they can go just to get the help that they need to be successful and to be a contributing citizen is what keeps me up at night. And and then that leads to the housing crisis for them when they're not stable.
And so this question is specifically for Mark. So I have some property that has been approved for rezoning for affordable housing for seniors. And I'm a pharmacist by trade, but I see the need for affordable housing. And so kind of going back to the point of not reinventing the wheel, do you have some type of internship program or something where you reach out to other people who want to do the same thing that you're doing so that we can learn? I have the land, I want to do it and learn how to do it and do it over and over again. But again, that's not my specialty, but if I could reach out to someone who's already doing it and they're saying, you know what, we're working on the same purposes, so there's enough for us all to work together and make sure that it's getting done.
Kudos to you, first off, that's awesome. It's really cool. You're looking at half of Ascent housing, so no. Honestly, I owned 0 apartment units 4 years ago. And I wasn't an apartment investor, wasn't in affordable housing. I went to meetings like this for 2 years. And I come from a real estate background. I used to make loans on all sorts of properties, and actually I used to make loans on these old apartment communities. And that's how I was like, hey, my clients are super nice who I give these loans to. I mean, their business plans really suck for a low-income household because it's like they're the nicest person in the world, and you look at it and you're like, oh, they're going to raise rents 40%, and oh my gosh, we're going up $200 next year, and oh my gosh, nobody can afford that, and all these families are going to get displaced in the next 2 years, and you're not going to recognize the place. And I was like, well, this is really bad. What is everyone doing about it? And I looked around and I was like, well, the tax credit program doesn't work well for this. And there really isn't anyone talking about it except for like 2 cities. It was Minneapolis and Austin at the time. And so I moonlighted, and I just did things like this, and I got in the room, and I had read like, I don't know, 15 hours of stuff, probably. I made a couple phone calls. And there was one moment at a Center City Partners meeting in like 2017 or 18, and they're like, who's going to talk about the NOAAs? And I was like, I've done my little research, and like, I became a NOAA expert in Charlotte that day. And then I joined a company that was investing in real estate and had a good ethos about them, and I didn't say I wanted to do affordable housing, but like a month after I joined, I was like, by the way, I don't want to do anything that I said I was going to do. I kind of want to buy these little apartments. I figured out that's kind of how it started. And so I relate to that, right? Because it's, we're not from a big company, not from this. I really didn't have the pedigree. I really had to learn on the fly. I would hope that some of our established, groups like Dream Key, who've been here for decades and have a lot of great infrastructure, groups like Wall Street, who've been growing a lot over the last decade, would have an opportunity like that. If not, I would love to talk to you and just tell you what I know and share our knowledge, because it's been a very interesting journey for me, not in the development space, but in this preservation space. And the cool thing about affordable housing is, when you deal with tax credits, there's a lot of rules. You have to know the rule book. But everything else, it really is a lot of creativity. And there's a lot of situations. In Charlotte, as bad as it is, we really are blessed. Because we really have a lot of great organizations. I'm going to have 60 investors in this fund we just closed 3 days ago. It's $67 million, 60 different investors, and that's everyone from companies to foundations and endowments to rich folks to family offices and the like. And it's the second time we've asked for their money in the last 2.5 years. And no one's doing it to make money. It is not a good investment by any means. Like, if my dad would call me and be like, should I invest this? I'm like, no. You need to earn a better return on your money. You gotta worry about your retirement. But they do it because they want to feel good. And they do it because they see the issue. And they do it because it's staring us at the face here in Charlotte. And I think the fact that we have that really gives me hope. And so I would hope that, with some creativity and knowing your site and a little bit of mentorship, you can find capital providers to help you execute that project. And I hope we see more of that, because I'm just dying to see kind of the next iteration of small, big, medium, what have you, affordable housing participants come to this, because there really is no better feeling. Being a landlord sucks. I didn't go to college and be like, I'm going to be an apartment landlord one day. Things break, stuff happens, But when we move in somebody who is going on a motel, or is experiencing homelessness, or family with this situation or that situation, or we take over an apartment project that someone's been living in for 20 years, and everything's falling apart, and then we invest it, and it's gorgeous, and the rent hasn't changed at all, it is the best feeling in the world. And so I encourage anyone, it's hard, it's painstaking, it takes a long time, but you give it space once you do it, I can't think of anything better. So I hope you do it.
Well, as we wrap up, one of the things I didn't actually tell you all is who I work with. So I work with Leading Opportunities. So some of you all may remember after the Chetty study came out, looking at how Charlotte ranked in economic mobility. And one of the things that you're hearing today, and we have learned through our work, is that there is no one silver bullet to fix the issues and the challenges with economic mobility. And as you heard today, it takes public-private partnerships, it takes private-private, public-public, it takes a variety of partnerships and a variety of strategies to really address economic mobility. We've created on our website an opportunity compass that looks at the drivers of economic mobility. So what does it actually take? Where are the needles and the buttons that we need to push? And it's a whole bunch of them to move the needle and increase economic mobility here. And so that is the work that we're doing. We're trying to work with different organizations like this, government entities, to do this work, because it really is going to take, as Mark said, creativity as we approach and continue to approach and rethink how we address economic mobility here in Charlotte. One of the questions that Chris wants me to have you all answer is, how can the media play a role in addressing these challenges that we're facing in housing? And with that, we'll close it out. So, Mark?
I said a lot, I need a break.
All right. I already, said before that platforms like these are great, and I'll say it again now that Chris is in the room. Thank you. I think these are essential for building long-lasting partnerships and relationships. But one of the other things I think the media can really help, and I know the CJC is already doing because I read the articles, is just changing the narrative around homelessness. I feel like when we say homeless, a homeless person, we have a certain image in our head. And with COVID, all the impacts that COVID has had on rentals and inflation and things like that, that narrative has changed. We really need to think differently about what homelessness is. It's very different from what it was 5 years ago. We have to be able to see, and once again, media is already and will continue to play an important role in showing us those stories. Everyone comes from different situations and circumstances. COVID has just inflated all of that, and homelessness looks very different today. So I would say narrative, change the narrative.
I would agree with that totally, to change the narrative, to learn the language of the housing providers, the housing community, because you're right, the face of homelessness has changed, and saying a person is, that homeless person, you could say someone that is experiencing homelessness, or a person without a home right now. So there are different ways so that it's not in a negative light, because any of us could face that at any moment in our lives. So I think just understanding the housing and homeless system language. The other thing I would say I would agree with is that having these forums, that really does help. It gets the information out there to the public and to hopefully our elected officials. I think Chris said he was going to share this with the elected officials, and I think writing stories about the achievements of people. I think those people that move into their housing, they're successful. 2 years, using that information to motivate others that may be in the community and maybe wanting to make that difference, or the people that are still struggling, letting them see that it is possible. That the organizations, because sometimes there's a lack of trust with our different organizations, and so painting that picture of it is possible to make it out of your situation would be helpful, and for that to be shared with the community at large.
No, we don't have more questions, but we're chiming on that one. You chime in? We're out of time.
Yeah, I'll stick to it.
All right, well, thank you all very much for